Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 55th live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum panel session. Today, we're going to discuss leveraging outcome-driven metrics for human risk management and security awareness. I'm Scott Wright, the CEO and Chief Engagement Officer at ClickArmor, and your host for today. And if you're a security awareness manager, a security professional, or even a business manager who's just concerned about cybersecurity or human vulnerability, you're in the right place. We have as usual, a seasoned panel of experts today and very engaged audience, lots of chat going on, ready for a fun and informative discussion. This Cybersecurity Awareness Forum, as we call it, the CSAF, is an open collaboration group for anyone who's passionate about security awareness and human risk management. And it's brought to you by ClickArmor. And ClickArmor is the employee cyber confidence builder. If you're looking for engaging employee cybersecurity training and a more effective way to train staff that's easy to deploy, we'd love to talk to you. And we'll learn more about ClickArmor in a few minutes. But let's get started. And before we introduce the panelists today, just a reminder for attendees to enter in the chat where you're coming from. We're going to see right now where everybody is joining us from around the world. So we have, I think, Denver, Ottawa, where I am. We have Montreal, San Jose, Minnesota. Wow, Columbia, Maryland, Dublin, Ireland, Atlanta, Georgia, Wilmington, North Carolina, Oslo, Toronto, Idaho, Turkey. Thanks very much for joining us from Turkey, and the UK, as well as Western Canada and Chicago. So great representation today. Thanks everybody for that. As I get started, I'm going to let a couple of our esteemed panelists introduce themselves, just 30 seconds or a minute to chat about what your role is, your passions, and things like that. So, Thea, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. So my name is Thea Mannix. I actually trained originally as a neuroscientist, and as most of us do in cybersecurity, fell into cybersecurity rather by accident and started working within the field of cyber psychology. So my main passions here is actually measuring and how do we measure behavior change. So this is a really great panel for me to be on because it's what I like to talk about. So
Excellent.
thank you for
And
having me.
we love to have your comments too. Thanks, Thea. And joining us after a long absence is Alex Panaretos. Thanks for joining us again, Alex.
My pleasure. It's great to be back. Like Thea, I kind of came into the human aspect of cyber from broadcast journalism. So I brought more of that storytelling approach and how fast can we get the news out to the audience that matters. Spent the last 15 years or so working in the land of operation security and consulting for global businesses on reducing that human risk piece there, and then really challenging the way those metrics are looked at. I think we're going to have a great discussion around click rates and all of those good things. So I can't wait for this.
That's very cool. And for anybody who hasn't met me before, as I said, I'm CEO of ClickArmor. I've been in the cybersecurity world for over 20 years, I guess. I got really interested in human vulnerability and learning about cybersecurity in terms of what employees need to understand. About 10 or 15 years ago, started teaching security awareness then, and decided that the platforms that we have out there for actually training foundational skills to employees were lacking a little bit because mostly they were not very interactive. So we built a very interactive, gamified platform that allows for all kinds of different training, especially for remediation and for role-based training and things like that. So love to chat with people about that at some point, but let's get on with the show. I'm going to start with my usual slide, which is about context. We'll start with a little bit of a definition. I imagine there are some people on the call who may or may not have heard of outcome-driven metrics before. It's not something that we talk a lot about, but from a business and executive point of view, I think it's actually probably very important. And it's something that Gartner has certainly been promoting. I don't know for sure if Gartner developed it. If anybody in the panel or in the participants can shed any more light on where outcome-driven metrics actually came from, that'll be interesting. But I just wanted to give people a little context in two slides. And then we'll open it up for some open questions for the panel, for everybody else, and we'll do some polls as well along the way so that we can get input from people on their thoughts around this. So Gartner's defined outcome-driven metrics as measuring operational and business outcomes that provide a direct line of sight back to the outcomes on which they depend and with outcomes that are dependent on them. That sounds a little confusing, but I think the general idea is that we're talking at an executive level. The metrics are designed to measure and report on the effectiveness of investments. And we'll talk a little bit more about what are the things we can measure. And in the context of cybersecurity, outcome-driven metrics help measure the levels of protection created by different control classes. So if you're familiar with security compliance frameworks, you'll understand the concept of controls. One last slide just to get the context. In terms of relevance to human risk management, obviously outcome-driven metrics could be used for a lot of different approaches for different programs in a business. But from a human risk management point of view, it seems that we're focusing on, as I said, language that executives can understand around enabling or assessment of whether or not risks are being managed. And it really frames things around business drivers. So when we talk, I know that we've had input from various people before the session. I did ask a number of people on LinkedIn just to provide their thoughts on what it means to them and how they've seen it working before. And I got a real wide range of responses. Some people saying, it's about, things like customer experiences and the things that executives really care about and can talk about. But others would say it's about phishing click rates. And so is that an outcome that, where we want to talk about? I think we need to put those things in context. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert on it. I'm hoping, Alex and Thea will help, and anybody who has experience in it will also be able to jump in. So with that, I'm going to just start the first poll, and the panelists can enter it as well. It's really just around, before this session, what level of knowledge did you have around outcome-driven metrics? You had no knowledge, you might have heard about it, you might actually have been involved in organizations that use it, you might actually be using it now. So we'd just like to get people's views on the actual use of outcome-driven metrics. And now we can open it up to the panel. So what examples have you seen where outcome-driven metrics have been used for human risk management and security awareness, and how successful were they? If you haven't, in terms of people in the panel, then let's speculate and see where this goes and what kind of comments we get from the participants. So from a logistics point of view, Alex, if you want to comment, you can, while Thea or I are talking, you can put up your hand. Or if nobody puts up their hand to answer, I'm going to either say something that comes to mind or pick somebody to speak. So Thea's been through this before. She's usually pretty fast on her feet. So I'll let her talk a little bit about what outcome-driven metrics means to her and where she's seen it used.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I think something that I'm really, really keen to say at the beginning is that a lot of people that assume everything that they're measuring is an outcome in terms of this context, because all measurements have an outcome. They have a number at them at the end of it. But not all measurements provide an outcome that is an outcome-driven metric. So I was, kind of racking my brains for a really good example that either I've been through or is kind of theoretical, but I have been through one that they were using training completion rates as an outcome-driven metric. So this is what we were measuring. Everyone's done the training. And in fact, training completion rates is what we call, I suppose scientifically, we call it a mediating variable. It's not actually telling you anything other than is the issue that people aren't doing the training. Right? So you're not actually, you need to focus on the behavior of what you're trying to change. Now, one of the real big issues that you come up against is some people are like, how do I measure that? Now, some of them are fairly easy. So, for example, I wouldn't particularly use click rates, but like rates of reporting, for example, rates of accurate reporting, If you're looking at phishing, I would also say things like, are people using the VPN when they should in appropriate times? Has that increased or not? Things like that. Those would be behavioral metrics. And if you find that people aren't doing that, what you can do is go back to your training completion rate metric and say, well, is it because they haven't done the training? And if it's yes, if it's no, everyone's done the training, then there's a problem with the training. So everything that you measure probably has some sort of information value, but it's not necessarily driving the outcome that we're talking about. And I have had that where I've switched them from, okay, well, we're going to keep measuring completion rates, for example. But what I actually want you to look at is, let's go into your log files, let's go into your Azure, let's go into whatever, and actually look at people doing what you're trying to get them to do. And then we include that as what we call like mediating variables. So is it because of this or not? Not necessarily that's the outcome we want. You can get stuck when you take mediating variables, you get to the outcome and that's what you use. You get stuck there. It's not very useful. Everyone's done the training, but nobody's doing what we want. But everyone's done the training. High five.
Let's take those little wins while we can, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Alex, would you like to add more?
Yeah, happy to. And I'm so glad that Thea described it in that way, because when you think about a simple way of what are outcome-driven metrics, a lot of that can be a return on investment of time, energy, finance as well, but it really is how well you are protecting against threats, you're complying with regulations, and you're supporting the overall business goals. And what I have found in my history with working with so many different security and business teams is the security team doesn't always understand where they fall in line as a priority for the actual business. And as much as I hate to say it, the business can exist without security. It's not ideal, but the business can exist. Security can't exist without the business. And so when you're looking at outcomes, what is the business outcome that we're trying to get to? Is it to have more secure operations, obviously, but is it to increase market share? Is it to retain information? Is it to protect intellectual property? Whatever the business goals are the metrics that we need to then help to support those goals and not write our own kind of off in a silo. And so to Thea's point, I see training completion being used as an outcome-driven metric. If we teach everyone, then therefore we're more secure. Well, that's not the case. I think all of us can think back to elementary, secondary, even university, and we learn things for the test in the moment. If you asked us what certain things were right now, no idea. And it's very similar for most people who are in non-security roles. So training can't be seen as an outcome-based metric. It can be seen as a qualifier, but not necessarily in the context of how we're talking about it today. So I was really glad to hear Thea bring that up right out of the gate.
That's really interesting. Being not an expert on it, I've seen outcome-driven programs that I would say were, but I don't know if they were formally defined that way. I had an interesting chat with somebody who's actually in the audience today. I'm not going to call him out, but he was one of the people that provided insights on the question that I asked. And feel free to jump in and enter in the chat if you would like, if you know who you are. But a number of really good examples of outcomes versus what he described as inputs and outputs. And I think Thea touched on that too, in terms of outputs versus outcomes, right? The things that we measure are often outputs, but not necessarily outcomes. So there are reduction in security incidents caused by human error, right? So we definitely want to see incidents reduced, and I think executives probably understand, more incidents is bad, less incidents is good. Whether that is the level that every executive wants to see or that security program managers can report on, it should be something I've been asked many times how you can tie security training to any kind of, return. And I usually do it in terms of, or suggest that if the first place to start would be to connect incidents that can be identified as being caused by humans to the training that they took. Did the people who took training actually end up in less incidents? And I think that's a good example. I have more to talk about that later, but there are other things like improved security culture, which are things that you could measure as well. And increased compliance, as Alex mentioned, compliance is one of the business objectives. We need to be compliant in a lot of different areas, different programs, and that is something at the executive level. And then less tangible things like employee confidence in identifying threats. Confidence is huge, I think. The people who go through training, if you ask them, how much better equipped do you feel at spotting, deep fakes or things like that might be coming at you, I think would probably recognize people don't feel that confident unless they've had a chance to experience things in a way that is helps them in learning. So a few other areas, making employees making more proactive security decisions, less downtime from security incidents, faster, frictionless security processes, and a lot of other items. I'm not going to go through them all, but I think it just sort of illustrates there are many ways you can look at this from an executive point of view. So somebody in the chat has raised their hand, and I'm going to try and find them and bring them in. Kivan. So I'm going to promote you to panelist just for a minute, and if you can accept the prompt, then you can speak. So in the meantime, as I said, I just want to, oh, she declined, or he declined, sorry. But did have a raised hand. Do you want to talk? I'll just turn on the mic if that helps. Would you like to speak? Nope, that was a typo. Okay. Well, I was all excited, but anyway, never mind. With that in mind, I think anybody who has, I think Simone had a comment on the prior statement, would say that security is a business enabler. Traction for a stakeholder buy-in has been historically lacking, and she's seen success when we frame human risk management and security training in that sense. So Thea, yeah, you had a comment on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to come on that because first of all, Alexander, I think that was it was such a good point, is that security can actually not exist without business, but business can exist without security. This is something we don't admit to ourselves in the industry ever. But it is true, and a lot of them are actually walking around with nothing. And they're just getting lucky in the sense that they're not getting, whatever. But just to Simone's comment, there's something that my former colleague Kairora used to say to me is, security is here today, so you can still do business tomorrow. And I thought that was that was kind of something along those lines. That used to go down really well with businesses when you say that to them, Yeah, it's not that you can operate today, but potentially you can't tomorrow if you don't have these things. And I agree. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it brings to mind another analogy. Well, actually, a real life example I think I heard of many, many years ago about air traffic controllers having an argument with pilots about what the pilot wanted to do, and the air traffic controller was saying no or whatever. And then at some point, after a number of back and forth barbs, the pilot says, "Am I up here because you're down there, or are you down there because I'm up here?" That sort of puts it clearly who should be there, or who's maybe not quite so necessary, right? So the business is the main focus. The security is the enabler, making it work better. Awesome. Now I'm going to go to another poll question. I'll just share my screen here so we can all see it. And I'm going to launch it now. And that is, what level of outcomes for human risk management and security awareness do you think can effectively be measured in your organization, or if you're a consultant or not management in an organization, organizations you worked with, choose any of these that apply. Could be completion of training, micro learning, phishing test results, and then moving itself up in the value stack or the executive level stack, things like executive or external stakeholder feedback, and anything else. There's a lot of other things you might be thinking of that aren't in this list. So feel free to just type in the chat anything that comes to mind there. And we'll let people work on that for a few minutes. But I would like to look at what are the potential challenges of focusing on outcome-driven metrics. And I have some ideas on that, but Thea or Alex, do you want to start it off?
I'm happy to. I think one of the potential challenges here is that it allows for more gaps when you talk about overall risk management, because you can become very tunnel focused on reducing specific metrics or increasing metrics depending on what you're trying to do. And you get a very narrow tunnel of what you're actually after versus how does it impact the larger risk profile of the overall organization. So this is where I don't think enough people in security engage enterprise risk, to a certain extent, internal audit teams, even legal, to say truly what are the major risks that we are facing now? What are ones that are in the periphery that could very well come into play very quickly? I think anything concerning AI is definitely something that if it isn't omnipresent right now, it will become that way. And then just those global regulations, how do those impact risk? Is your organization one that has a lot of attrition, where you have a constantly changing workforce? That can introduce substantial numbers of different metrics that will impact your outcomes without necessarily thinking about that as you're building this program. So a lot of times when people are taking this on, they get a very narrow lens of what outcomes we're trying to focus on without thinking about the larger impact to the organization.
Excellent. Thea, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's along similar lines of what I've been thinking about this, is that because what's the phrase? What gets measured gets managed. So you focus on this KPI, and I don't think a lot of the problem with this is that you get focused on outputs that don't mean anything. But this can still happen with outcome-driven measures.
Yeah.
Is that these are all things that help you fill in a story, and you need to step back and see the story. And if you just get focused on, if I improve this number, we do better, that's not true. And it's very easy to get stuck with that because numbers are easy. Numbers are easy, they go up, they go down, you're doing basic numeracy. But actually what you need to look at is a global risk analysis. You need to look at global risk picture. And a lot of that as well is qualitative. It's qualitative information. It's not just numbers or whatever. You need to be able to also put in, your organizational culture, for example. You need somebody to be able to look at what you're doing from that perspective. And those things are difficult. Anything that's difficult to measure as well ends up getting put out, even if it's really important. But because it's hard to measure it objectively, people don't tend to even start considering it because we're so focused on getting this number to a certain place. And it really actually can put you in a lot of blind spots. So I think it's very similar to what Alex said, really. I also think in terms of both outcome-driven metrics in terms of business, but also in terms of cybersecurity as well. If you're just looking at cybersecurity measurements, it's a very similar problem.
Excellent. I see Camille or Samil has raised their hand, and I've just allowed them to talk. So if you want, you can jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
I just want to add something because I am also an OKR master, so I am using these outcomes a lot, and at the same time, I'm a privacy expert. So I just wanted to share that when I want to explain what is outcome to the audience I have, I mostly give this example. Output are the actions through your goal, but outcome is the how you would know that you reached your goal. So, for example, learning 3 Spanish words every day is the output-oriented goal, output-driven metric you have. But being able to speak some Spanish in your next vacation is the outcome. So that way you can know that you reached your goal at some point. From cybersecurity part, not the maybe how much trainings you give, how much phishing attacks you made. Just taking this number and considering this number are mostly like output-oriented results, and actually they don't give how successful you are. So instead of that, you need to metric of phishing attack success rate. When you have this rate, you can understand if your trainings are worked or not. So just putting metrics like, for example, give training for cybersecurity training in a year. That doesn't show anything actual. That doesn't show how successful you are. So I just wanted to add that because I mostly try to explain the difference between the output and the outcome. So I just wanted to point that.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that. And I just wanted to ask a quick clarifying question. When you say phishing attack success rate, you're talking about real phishing attacks, or are you talking about phishing tests?
Test, not
tests.
real phishing attacks. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Oz wants to speak. Excellent. So I will bring Oz in. Allowed to talk. Go ahead, Oz.
Scott, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for letting me join you and indeed share. Really, really great to see and hear this conversation going on. Some really great people on here who know a lot more than me. So excellent. And also, I just thought this is such a good topic. Interestingly, one I shared a little bit about today with the groups that I spend time with: inputs, outputs, outcomes. And I just wanted to come back to that example of the last person. I think, sorry, Camille or Samil, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, so hopefully I'm not doing it too much disservice. But you gave an example, and I love the fact that you used a really practical thing that everybody could understand to then initially break it down. You used the example of learning to speak a language, and I think the language you said was Spanish. And you said the input was maybe doing some lessons, but you said the outcome was then being able to speak a certain amount in Spanish. Was that correct? And if so, I don't think I agree. And I think this is where the areas we get mixed up with in security. I would suggest that the input is taking Spanish lessons. I would suggest that the output is being able to speak a certain amount in Spanish, and the outcome might be communicating with people to a certain standard, achieving levels of friendship or getting a job or doing something that you want to, the reason you learned to speak Spanish in the first place. And so I think that's really important, because that's where we get mixed up in security. We often mistake inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And if we start from the end, outcomes, the business cares about outcomes. And therefore we have to be really clear. What is it that the business actually is trying to achieve? Is it save money? Is it reduce risk? And if so, what type of risk? Save money how? Is it make money? Or of course, is it be more productive? It's generally one of those four things for most businesses. And then it's tying ourselves back to those. So I just thought I'd share that, Scott. I know it's just a perspective and a view, but it is one that I think I could back up with relatively simple bits of literature. Happy to share. Thanks for letting me on.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much, Oz. I think what that brings to mind for me is in a lot of ways seems, based on who I talk to, it seems quite relative in terms of how every person interprets it. But I think to get the maximum value from the initiative, we do probably have to look at the highest level of what it is we're actually trying to achieve. And I think Oz gave a good example of being able to speak the language versus being able to accomplish something through that speech too. So I'm going to let Thea and Alex both have their hands up. I'll let them expand on that.
Oh, thank you. So this analogy does my storytelling heart so much good, because I think you have to bring people along that journey. And to Oz's point, when we talk about awareness and training and outcomes, awareness and training programs are the communications, the mediums that which we then teach digital literacy, because I think that is something critically lacking in today's society. Cybersecurity is a critical life skill now that multiple generations don't have a foundational working knowledge of. And so the awareness programs are a way to start building that knowledge to get someone literate, which then has the outcome of, reducing the mean time to detect, reducing the mean time to respond, reducing the cost of operations, reducing the number of incidents, which is ultimately where most programs want to get to. And instead, most programs right now are saying, we're going to communicate, we're going to train, we're going to do phishing assessments, and therefore we have a secure cyber workforce. That is not true. Anyone can learn to take a test, but that real life application, that trusting of intuition, that permission to question or to admit that I have failed in some capacity, and I'm coming to the team to say, I don't know what happened. I don't know what to do here. Can you help me? That is where that cybersecurity culture piece is critical. Because if you have not built a cyber culture, actually not even cyber culture, organizational culture, where people feel empowered to ask questions, they feel confident, even in a mistake, to know that there's not necessarily a negative action that will happen, asterisk for the small, 2% that are intentional. But really enabling your workforce to be a live, living, breathing part of this outcome, and realizing that you're going to have to shift and adapt as the age of your workforce changes, as the technology that your workforce is using, as their day-to-day operations change, before we even introduce third-party risk into the conversation. So knowing that you're taking someone along that journey and helping people understand that there are metrics that are critical for each portion of that journey. But what we're trying to get to is that outcome-based metric. What is the outcome-based metric that we're chasing? Is it the reduction of incidents? Fantastic. That in turn leads to another outcome, which is we're reducing costs to cyber operations. So depending on my audience, if I'm talking with a CFO or a financial team, I'm going to focus on the reduction of cost by all these other steps to get there. So curious to hear what Thea has to say, but this analogy discussion works really well with non-cyber stakeholders.
Go ahead, Thea.
Yeah, I think it was a great point Oz made, and also Alexandra. What I would say is that getting out of the cybersecurity utopia that we're currently discussing, that we're in, right? A lot of these outcome-driven metrics are also sorry, it was about to mute me for no reason. It doesn't like what I'm about to say. Are also used, sometimes business and security are clashing, often, a lot of times, because business wants to run efficiently, right? And then security is often coming up and going, well, you need to invest in X, Y, and Z. And they come to the end of the year and nothing happened. And the business goes, well, what do I get? And you go, well, you get nothing. And then it's hard to demonstrate the value of what you're doing. So sometimes we have to, or people that I've worked with have had to introduce metrics that try to convince people that are higher up the line to continue to invest in cybersecurity, even though we're not actually hitting the nail on the head on that. We're not necessarily presenting them with the things that we know are reducing their risk and so on. We're introducing them with things like, for example, cost-efficient metrics and things like that. So just going back to the example that that was discussed earlier, I think it depends on what you want. I mean, well, what is the outcome? Sometimes it is something really meaningful and it is risk reduction. Ultimately, that's at the heart of everybody conducting cybersecurity. But also sometimes you've got to play the game in business realistically. And sometimes you're going to have to use output metrics as outcome-driven metrics in order to achieve what you want. And I just kind of didn't want to ignore that for the people that are actually on the ground and not kind of like me just philosophizing in an ideal scenario.
Absolutely. I think that's amazing that you brought that up, because it actually is a great segue to what I wanted to say about this particular point. And that is, we're assuming that every organization has the data and the infrastructure to implement those things. And in many cases, small, medium-sized businesses don't have an enterprise risk management program, and they may not even know what outcomes that they can identify. And so they kind of have to turn to some of those output-based metrics that, we're talking about. And I think that's really important. The last thing I wanted to say on this about challenges with ODM is that it can be, I think it was kind of brought up by Alex and Thea, that it can be difficult to figure out if you're getting the right outputs or the right outcomes or measuring them. But let's say that you've done your phishing tests, and maybe phishing tests are the most appropriate outcome, as Thea said. Then there's a problem of figuring out how do you change the inputs to influence that in the direction you want. One of the things that I remember that I first met Alex because I reached out after I read the book, The Security Culture Playbook. And there was a really good quote by another author in, it's really easy to change corporate culture, just not that easy to change it in the direction you want it to go. So we have to keep in mind that the things that we're measuring and we want to change, we have to look a little deeper than just the outputs. And I kind of take issue with the way Gartner wrote the description to say a direct line of sight to the original dependencies, because it doesn't really give you visibility into what's it going to take to get people to understand what does a phishing email look like? What are the kinds of attacks they need to spot? And can you get them to be confident, as Alex said, in being able to make those choices without shaming them? And so that's something that ClickArmor does, and it's a great thing. I'm just going to pop up my screen for 1 minute, and that is the fact that we use gamified lessons. And so we give people a chance to get immersed and interactive, so they are engaged. It keeps their focus, but we also have simulations that are virtualized. So basically it's a virtual inbox. Rather than sending people a real email and having them in the emotion of the moment deciding whether or not something is a threat, we do it before they actually face it in the real world. So it's not so emotionally charged, and they'll actually get a chance to objectively analyze, was this good or bad? And nobody else needs to know I got this one wrong, right? And so these are things that I want to focus on in terms of helping organizations get to that ODM goal, because there are those intermediate steps you've got to take once you get the outcomes measured, right? Alex.
Yeah, so I love the fact that you brought up emotion in this, because there has to be motivation, trust, communication, to a certain extent, intuition, right? And I have this conversation with a lot of people here recently, is we have now established a blind trust of technology, where if it's on my device, I believe it. And we have ignored those primal danger sensors that normally the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, or this doesn't quite feel right. We've eliminated that need to have confidence in how something reacts with us. And that's what the social engineers, that's what the cyber criminals are all taking advantage of, is that void of trust in our own decision making, because we've now just blindly trusted if it's on my computer, it's fine. And in doing that, we have truly handicapped a lot of the natural behavior that we're now trying to teach again. And so that intrinsic motivation to change, to want to learn, to have permissions to ask questions, or why are we doing this? Or how does increasing the cyber budget benefit the business in the end? Those mission critical discussions, no matter what the size of the business is, what has to keep moving? Those are your primary metrics you need to focus on. If you can do nothing else, what keeps the lights on? Is it my business reputation? Is it the ability to get widgets out the door? Is it my ability to retain trained personnel? What are those mission critical pieces? And then work backwards.
Yeah.
And then look and say, what are the generational differences that I'm working with? What is the trust level of technology? What am I asking these people to do versus what is something that can be controlled by technology where they don't have to have that choice. Where can I eliminate risk by choice is one aspect. And then sometimes it's just communication. And so people can over-engineer any metrics program. It doesn't matter what we're calling it. People are drowning in data right now. And we have to rise above all of the noise of every metric somebody tells us we have to track to what is mission critical for our organization. What do I have to track for regulations? What do I have to track for certain compliances? What do I have to track to keep the lights on? And then get rid of the rest of the noise. You don't have to have 60 cyber KPIs. I've seen organizations with 100 of them, and what are you doing with this? Except showing that you're busy.
Yeah, this is awesome. And this is a great chance, I think, Alex, if you're open to it. I know that you have a little bit of a message for people, and I would like to give you the opportunity to say it now.
Thanks. It's not much of a message, but I was recently downsized like so many of our friends in tech. So if anyone knows of openings, I'm actively looking. Even if it's just on a contractor program evaluation basis, would be happy to help. So thank you, Scott, for being able to.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think anybody would be lucky to have you, and great value, I'm sure, in what you're producing. I also want to put the next question to you because you kind of raised it to me when we started talking about this, and that is, how can tools like risk registers be used to choose appropriate outputs and associated inputs? And I changed my poll question. Usually I do a poll before the question, but I'm going to do the poll afterwards to see what people think after you explain to them maybe the value of doing this.
There's two ways to look at risk registers. There's an official risk register held by organizations long and large enough for enterprise risk, even cyber risk registers. And it's just an official documentation of these are the known risks that we are actively working against. I use them in human-based programs to then say, okay, here's our top 12 risks. What of these risks do people, by doing or not doing something, either mitigate or escalate the risk? And then what is that behavior? What do I need people to do? And then what do people need to know to be able to do? And that's where I build the curriculums, the assessments, the communications from, is ultimately the behavior that makes that risk move up or down, or addresses a threat that impacts that risk. Instead of just blindly guessing of here's the top 12 things in an awareness program that aren't necessarily applicable to an organization. So that's how I use risk registers, just based on an industry. Working with pharma is going to be dramatically different than working with oil and gas. Similar highly regulated industries, but their risk profiles and their day-to-day operations are very, very different. So their risk registers look very different.
That's cool. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because I've worked in the past with the Canadian government, and one of the objectives of the government in management is to be risk oriented and risk-based decision making. And when you look at it from that point of view, prioritizing risks mean I'm putting the most important thing at the top of my list of investments, things I can invest in. And that really is what drives, the outcomes that you want, right? You need to address those biggest risks first. And so if you can prioritize them based on usually impact, a combination of impact and likelihood, so that you can figure out what the appropriate priority is. So I wanted to just say that, and thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else have any thoughts on using risk registers for human risk management?
I do have a thought
Excellent.
about that. So I think it's really important to log and particularly track changes over time. I think that is actually really essential because then you can see I did this and then this was the result and over what period of time, and it makes you better able to plan and stuff over time. But I find people come at it from two different perspectives. And as Alex mentioned earlier on, the busy KPIs tend to come from what can I measure? So they're not looking at what is my problem, they're looking at what can I measure, and then you end up with, like, for example, 100 different KPIs or whatever. And I would really recommend that you come at it from the perspective of what are our major risks, And actually, not just looking at that from a percentage ratio, but also potential damage ratio, and then kind of mediating both of those aspects of it. And then looking at valuable measures. So a lot of people can have a really big problem, but they don't really have good measurements for measuring the risk of that problem. Don't just stick something in there because you're like, well, we need to be able to measure this. That's a problem that you need to come up with a good measurement. You only know what you know. And sometimes you don't have a really good direct measurement of that, but maybe you need to come up with a qualitative measurement. So we have 3 experts within the organization, for example. They're going to come in and discuss and tell us what level we're at based on a 0 to 100 score. For example, that is a valid measurement. But then so that would be definitely my recommendation for people. And I think if you are in an organization where you have 100 KPIs, you're not measuring anything. You're measuring everything, and you're actually measuring nothing by measuring everything. So definitely try and minimize those.
Yeah, and I guess the follow up from what we said before was if you've got a lot of data and you've got a lot of metrics, then use that risk-based approach to do the risk register and say, what's the biggest problem I want to solve? And then there's probably some data somewhere that we can sift through to get to it, right? And that makes it clearer which data we want to use. Excellent. So I did pop up the last poll question, and I'll just share my screen right now for it and get people. I think we already have quite a few people responding to it, but does your organization or most organizations you work with have a risk register or a risk management framework that could be used to support an ODM approach? At various different ways you can describe this, but basically progressively more and more involved. So I'd like to hear people's opinions on that before we go to the next point. I already talked about ClickArmor. I'm not going to go in there again, but there is something else I was going to say. I'll just turn off my sharing and let Alex speak again. Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, no, I saw a couple comments in the chat that I wanted to
Yes.
address. And one from Carrie about the discussion, this seems based for very large or mature organizations. This can be as simple as a list of things you want to track in an Excel spreadsheet. This does not have to be a large behemoth of a program that takes 20 people to run. You can do this very, very simply. Go with what you know, what your gut is telling you, or what you're observing, and say, these are, things that we probably need to start tracking. How are we going to do that? So all of these things that we're talking about, yes, we're talking about it through the lens of larger organizations, but you can absolutely do this at a smaller scale. And then Nick said, does the InfoSec industry and the businesses it works with need to develop empathy for the non-InfoSec folks to allow us to understand user and employee behavior? And how does an entire industry do that? I'm working with a lot of healthcare industries right now for this exact reason. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in one conversation with some healthcare professionals, and they said, our priority is saving lives. It is not saving data. And when you look at it from what their primary objective is, you see things differently. And this is where, I really encourage InfoSec teams to go out and be an active part of the business. Go shadow people. If you're seeing a large increase in certain things happening in certain departments, go sit and shadow that department. Why is that happening there and not somewhere else? Go talk to people. I think this is something that's slowly starting to change in InfoSec. We have to talk to people. It's a foreign concept, right? We have to understand.
Exactly. I was just going to say, normally we have Fleetus on like 90% of our panel sessions, and he would be saying that. So I'm really glad that you're saying it. He says, talk to people, right? Talk to your employees. Absolutely.
Yeah, but healthcare is a perfect example. If their aspect is on saving lives, they're not going to remember 60 things that I'm telling them on how to protect the files. So how can I make their life easier to do what I need them to do? Instead of making them log on 60 different places, which is obviously an exaggeration, let me just put a fingerprint scanner on the mobile units. They just have to put a fingerprint in. That is enough authentication for what they need to do in the immediacy of their care environment. Then those other systems and different documentation aspects. We can put other processes in place, but for what they do in their average day to day, a fingerprint scan is the only authentication they need. It's speedy, it's effective, and then an automatic timeout. So looking at the organization and knowing those roles will get you a lot more success than the typical way people are doing things now. Thea?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that point because I think it's really, really important is that people are actually not there they're there to do their job. And oftentimes their job is there because that's their passion. And it's something that's very important. And so it is really, really important for us as well as cybersecurity professionals to go, what is the minimum that I need you to do in order for you to be safe, and not add things that are maybe unnecessary, but are kind of nice to have. They're not there to do that. Also, just from the neuroscience perspective, if you take people away from the tasks they're supposed to be doing, this is very tiring for the brain. It doesn't like doing that. And I always advocate, if you can do it, try and calculate what we call a switch cost, which is how often are you taking people away from the job they're supposed to be doing in order to attend to cybersecurity issues. And if you're doing that a lot, right? If you're doing that 3, 4, 5, 10 times a day, not only are you probably reducing your security because people are exhausted at this point, you're also reducing your productivity significantly. So how are you actually improving your risk? You're just improving your KPIs, but you're not improving your risk. Yeah, I just wanted to really jump in on that and just kind of clarify. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Go ahead. One last comment, Alex, before we move
One
on.
last comment, because Thea just pulled a thought in. It's where can you integrate into things that are already occurring across the organization? Every team I've ever worked with has a staff meeting at some point during a day, a week, a month. Push information towards those middle managers, the administrative assistants, to be included in the meetings that are already occurring. This is a current threat. This is what we need to be people to be aware of. This is what we need you to do. That sometimes, actually, not sometimes, many times is much more effective than any training or other communication we're going to push out. Give it to the teams to individually push in the manner that their team is communicating, and you will have a lot more success than layering all this additional chatter on top of their daily life. Figure out what their day-to-day operations are and integrate so you become seamless, and you all often operate in more of a shadow type where they know you're there, but you're not seen as that energy drain.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to just for the sake of time, get us moving along. There's a couple minutes left. Just going to quickly review the poll results. If you guys can see this, unfortunately, it cuts off some of the actual words here, but I'm going to relay them for you. So in our chat or our poll for how much people knew ahead of time, the lowest one, or the bottom one, is the one of having no knowledge and working its way up. So there are a lot of people in the call that didn't have any knowledge of ODM, a few that knew about it but haven't seen it, some that have seen it, and a number that have actually been seen it and using it. So that's really interesting data. Then I'm going to give the panel a chance to just comment on anything that jumps out from the polls in a moment. But question 2 was, what level of outcomes for human risk management do you think can effectively be measured in your organization? And quite a few people went all the way to the top, and that's really encouraging too. So actually, no, that's not right. Went from the bottom up to the bottom, or bottom to the top. So the ones at the very top, external stakeholders, that's obviously something that we don't see as much. But many of the others were still pretty well considered in terms of things that could be done in the organization. And then finally, does your organization have a risk register? And many do, and are seeing how they can use it, and a number are using it for human risk management. That's really cool. So what do you guys think of that, Alex and Thea?
I think it aligns with a lot of what I'm seeing out there, where there's definitely some hills and valleys based on organization size and maturity. That this is not as surprising as I was maybe hoping it would be. All good things, though. All good things.
Excellent. Thea, any thoughts on the results?
Yeah, I also think different organizations have different levels of need in terms of security. Some of them, even though they're very important, don't have the level of what they call it risk threat landscape or whatever that somebody else has. It's very difficult to ask these kind of generalized questions
Yeah.
across industries, I think, and yeah.
Good
So
for discussion though. So
it's
all right.
absolutely, and it's really good to see as well.
Yeah. Excellent.
Really.
As we wrap up, I would like anybody to enter in the chat. Anything you learned today that you thought was really excellent? Anything you think you'll do differently as a result of what we discussed today? Love to hear how we might be helping people and impacting them. And just wanted to remind people that all of these sessions are recorded and available on our website, Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. So you can get there through this QR code, or you can find us from LinkedIn as well. But love to see more people join us there. And then finally, our next session will be April 16th. We're going to sort of dig into some fun stories and let people share their experiences around or their thoughts on AI-powered cyber attacks on employees. We're starting to see a lot of AI-based attacks. Some of them are targeting employees, some of them are more technical. I'd like to focus on the ones where there's a human element in terms of the vulnerability and how they were targeted and what we can learn from that. So I would love to see people in our next session on April 16th. And with that, I'll do a quick roundtable with anybody who wants to make a comment. Go ahead,
It was
Thea.
great. I really enjoyed that discussion, and thank you so much, Alex. It's the first time I've been on a panel with you, and I really enjoyed it, and lots of insights that I haven't heard before, a perspective I haven't seen before. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, we have a mutual admiration society because I love working with those in the neuro perspective, because it is so critical to the success that we're trying to impart with people and behavior. So this is great. I love the chatter in the chat window. It's been fantastic to see so much interaction. So thank you again.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll give people back their time for the next meeting, but thanks again, everybody. And I just like to remind people that engaged employees reduce risks. So until next time, we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.